is Mike from AutoGuide, and this week we have a rare one. Compact hatchbacks used to be the go-to choice for commuters. They used to litter college and university campuses everywhere, but now there's just a handful left. Everyone's gone SUV crazy, and these 5-door cars, well, they're rare. And making this one even more rare, it has a manual transmission. So why have all the manuals left? Well, it's pretty simple. The vast majority of people, they don't want them, and manufacturers don't really want to make them. So this week I'm going to try to answer a few questions. First, is the compact hatchback still relevant? 2, does it need a manual transmission? Is there any point to it? And 3, why is Mazda's Soul Red such an amazing color? It may be hard to believe, but this generation of Mazda 3 is now 7 years old. This is probably its last year, or at least its second last year. It's crazy though, the styling has aged so well. It could probably come out this year and still look completely modern. The sunken headlights and the recessed grille have always been pretty cool, and things have gotten a little more rounder, but it's nice that Mazda's doing its own thing. And then you have the 18-inch alloy wheels, which of course are wrapped in winter rubber because it's winter, and I apologize for how dirty the car is. All of our streets here are covered in salt. And moving back, you can just see the light glistening off that Soul Red paint. I really like the taillights. I think it's my favorite part of this car and always has been. I like that it's real 3D texture and not just some tricks using lights embedded within the whole assembly. And then down below, a rarity these days, a finished exhaust poking out on its own. In fact, there's 2. Mazda for a while has really been sort of form over function, and the 3 really fits in that category. It is so stylish and looks so cool, especially compared to most of its competitors on the road. But that leads to a rear seat area that's very tiny, and I'll show you that later. And look at the size of this pillar and blind spot in the back. Now, before we hit the road, let's just go over the interior quickly. This is one of the best interiors for the money. In fact, we call it one of the 10 best, surprisingly nice interiors in an affordable car. That wasn't the exact wording we used, but you get the idea. It's very restrained and very conservative, but in a nice, classy way. The dash sticks out right in the middle, and that's where a seam is with nice cross stitching that gives a little bit of color. And below it is a simple long rectangle of buttons for the climate control and dials. There's the infotainment system that protrudes out of the dash, and then it's controlled primarily by a series of buttons and dials down in the middle between the driver and passenger. Now, Kyle's commented that this is a very similar system to a certain German manufacturer, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's worked for them, it works for Mazda, but I'm still not a huge fan of the functionality of the infotainment system. I'm getting better at it and getting more used to it. I do like that if you have Apple CarPlay connected and you hit the navigation button in between the seats, it goes to your Apple CarPlay navigation preference, so Waze for me, as opposed to the system built into the car. The belt line's pretty high and it's kind of exaggerated in the car, which some shorter drivers might find is a little too high. I don't mind it. It gives me the feeling that I'm down in the car, like I'm in a performance car, and Mazdas usually are. And I love their steering wheels. They're like the right size, and the way they've molded them, it's just the perfect grip. And being close to everything, the shifter is right where I want it for my right hand to hit. The only downside with that is the cup holders are right in front. So if you have overly tall or wide cups that stick out, they may get in the way of the shifter, but you'd have to have a very specific kind of cup. The exposed metal speakers are nice, as is the handle on the glove box. It just really is an upscale feeling interior, and it's done with minimal bits and pieces. Sometimes luxury ends up being way over the top, and Mazda's really hit it good here. Front seat comfort's good. The way these seats are molded fit me really well. I'm about 6 feet tall and I still have headroom when I have the seat at its lowest position. I do have the power seats. Legroom is also really good. Like I said, the car is more around you than some vehicles, but it also makes you feel more connected to the car, although a little cramped. So back here, as long as the front seat's at least halfway up, I have enough legroom. The cushion is a bit low, so I don't really have any thigh support. And as you can see, I have hardly any headroom at all. And the way this giant pillar is and the way the roof curls down, it feels very tight and claustrophobic back here. Anyone bigger than a young teenager probably won't want to spend much time back here. On the plus side though, Mazda has outfitted the rear area just as well as the front, and that's something a lot of manufacturers don't do. Like even the door tops have soft touch material, which is pretty nice. All right, enough about that. Let's get out on the road and see how this manual really performs. I'm going to spend a week driving and I'll be back with my impressions and my final conclusion in a couple days. There's only one way to get the 6-speed manual in the 2025 Mazda 3, and that's by selecting the 2.5S Premium in the US or the Sport GT in Canada. It also only comes with front-wheel drive connected to the naturally aspirated 2.5-liter four-cylinder. Now, as much as I'd love it to be available with all-wheel drive and the turbo, I get it. Mazda would have to develop an entirely new manual, and as we kind of know in looking at the market, manuals aren't exactly in high demand, so that's not going to give Mazda much return on investment. But it's not like this combination that I have is terrible. I mean, the 2.5-liter four-cylinder still makes 191 horsepower and 186 pound-feet of torque. That's the base engine in the 3. That's similar power to a lot of upgraded engines in other compact vehicles, and you get a manual. The 2.5S Premium, or the Sport GT depending on country, includes features like the 12-speaker Bose audio system, head-up display, rain-sensing wipers, the signature lighting front and rear, and a moonroof. It also has 18-inch wheels that normally come in 215/45 R18 all-season tires, but mine, as I've mentioned before, has winter tires. Now, although this is a manual, it still comes with an electronic parking brake, so you're not going to be doing too many handbrake rally corners. The seats are leather. The front driver's seat is power. They're heated up front. The steering wheel is also leather. And there's wireless Apple CarPlay. In the US, the Premium comes with the 8.8-inch infotainment system, but in Canada, the GT gets the larger 10.25-inch system. Of course, there's all the usual active safety systems like blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, lane departure warning, lane keep assist, radar cruise control, driver attention alert, high beam control, and the rear seat alert. So the manual itself, the throws between gears are actually pretty long. I'm surprised at the distance between each one, but it is so smooth in engagement. In fact, all of the manual mechanisms are so smooth. The uptake point in the clutch is pretty high up in the pedal travel, and it's so smooth with engagement. Even if you miss by a couple hundred RPM that optimal shift point, the clutch just smooths it right out. You don't feel sort of that jerkiness or that sudden thud. Now, the flip side of that is someone who wants a very precise manual for spirited driving might not like this, as it just kind of smooths and numbs out the feeling when changing gears. But this isn't a sporty special. This is a higher end compact car that just happens to have a manual. It's no Mazda Speed 3, it's just a Mazda 3 with a sporty side. Leaving from a dead stop requires a good amount of RPMs for the clutch to engage smoothly. It could be prone to stalling, but even if you over rev the engine a bit when engaging that first gear, again, it kind of smooths it out for you. Now, that naturally aspirated engine itself, well, it's unusual for the fact of what I just said. It's naturally aspirated. Nowadays, that's rare in pretty much any vehicle. Everything seems to be going turbo, but with this Mazda stuck to a big four-cylinder, and being 2.5 liters, that is on the large side, so even if it doesn't have that low-down turbo torque, it still does have decent torque. It's just, we're getting so used to having that initial grunt real low that it took me a little bit to get used to having to rev out this engine to really get the power out of it. Now, once you do get it above about 3,000 RPM, it starts to wake up and it pulls this vehicle pretty well because just over 3,000 pounds is tested, and not many compact cars are that light. I mean, the 3 is smaller than a lot of the compacts, so that's part of its advantage, but also not having the turbo geometry or the all-wheel drive helps save weight, and that makes it more spirited than I expect. Now, you're not going to go drag race Civic Type Rs or anything, but there's more than enough power for everyday driving, and even when you want to be a little more spirited or enthusiastic, the power really matches the chassis well. Kind of like how the Miata is. Now, I'm not saying this is a front-wheel drive Miata or anything, but it's just Mazda's really good at matching the available power with the chassis, so it's never feeling excessively underpowered, and at the same time, the power is not overwhelming the chassis. The sort of more premium than a regular compact mission of the Mazda 3 is also reflected in the engine. It's really smooth. There's no vibration felt through the pedals or the steering wheel. Even under full throttle at high RPM, it remains pretty quiet. And in everyday driving, you don't even hear it's there. Its sophistication is maybe only matched by the Honda Civic in this class. Now, road and wind noise aren't kept quite as quiet, but in fairness, this is winter, so I'm on winter tires, so I'm getting more tire and road noise than I normally would. I did drive this on some very, very windy days, and although it was susceptible to crosswinds like any vehicle, I didn't hear the wind as much as I thought I would. So I briefly touched on handling, and I won't go into it too deep because again, it's winter tires, but you can feel that eagerness that's in a lot of Mazda vehicles. And we've complained about the steering being too heavy and stiff in some of their larger SUVs, but in the 3, the weight's great. It's exactly where it should be. I can feel that this was meant for drivers, for those who want a little more engagement with their vehicle. It's more exciting to drive than, say, a Kia K4 or a Nissan Sentra. Now that said, it doesn't quite have the same connection or levels of performance of a Elantra N or a Civic Type R. So I know what you're thinking. You're saying, well, Mike, what about the medium performance vehicles like the Civic Si or the Volkswagen GTI? Well, that's where things get a little interesting. In isolation, the Mazda 3 is a really good premium compact car that offers a little more fun and engagement with the manual transmission. But when you start to look at competitors and include price, it starts to lose some of its shine. So in the US, this costs $32,430 with destination charges. For several $100s less, you can get a Honda Civic Si, which also has a 6-speed manual, which is a nicer manual, and it has a slightly more powerful turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, and it's even more engaging to drive. Now that said, that might be a detriment because maybe it's too sporty for some people. But if that's the case, then you're probably not buying a manual Mazda 3 to begin with. In Canada, it's a bit of a better sell against the Civic, as it's now about $1,000 less than the Si, and the Si doesn't have performance tires at that price point. So does the Mazda 3 then have a sophistication advantage? Well, unfortunately for Mazda, we're talking probably the other compact cars that equal this in terms of refinement and quality and style. So one last thing to discuss before I wrap this up, and that's comfort. We've complained over and over again that a lot of Mazda SUVs are too stiffly sprung because, well, they are. The rides are way harsher than they need to be for what, at the end of the day, are family vehicles. Surprisingly, the 3 hatchback, which you'd think is a sportier vehicle, it's got a way more comfortable compliant suspension. Now, a lot of that probably has to do with the fact it has a lot less weight. It can be more softly sprung. Again, I'm bringing up the MX-5 Miata comparison, where that's got one of the best ride comforts for a performance vehicle because it's just so lightweight. The seats up front are super comfortable too. Long drives, I don't have any complaints. Nothing went numb. I wasn't uncomfortable. The rear seat actual comfort wasn't bad. My son passed out on 2 of our longer drives. It's just, as I mentioned earlier, you don't have the most airy feeling back there. So yeah, the 3 2.5S Premium or Sport GT, depending on your country, it's a pretty comfortable vehicle to drive, and Mazda's really nailed that balance between handling and comfort because this also handles really well. Not many manufacturers nail that formula perfectly on smaller cars, as they usually just go all in with a super stiff ride to get optimal handling. You know the cars I'm talking about. Let's go back to the 3 questions I posed at the start of this review. First, I don't know why Soul Red is so good compared to other reds. There's some sort of wizardry that Mazda's using to make it have such depth and shine. Question 2, is the Mazda 3 still relevant after all these years? And the answer is yeah. It's still wholly competitive against the best class leaders, and that's because Mazda's continued to update it, and they had such a good vehicle to start with. Of course, it doesn't compete in space inside, but it never has, and that's never really been its mission. But if you're looking for a premium small car, this is right up there with the best anyone else has to offer. And then there's the final question. Does the 6-speed manual still make sense in the Mazda 3? Well, that, like a lot of things in life, all comes down to perspective. If you're looking for a sporty small car with a manual up against the Civic Si, it's sort of a hard sell as they're sportier and pricing isn't much different. But if you're a big fan of the 3, albeit exterior styling, interior quality, refinement, whatever, and you want a little more performance in a manual transmission, well, this is a really good package. This isn't just Mazda slapping a 6-speed into a random package or a base model just to appease a couple enthusiasts. It's It's a well thought out, well put together car and should make those folks happy. I could even see this being a value alternative to something like the Integra with the manual. It gives near the same performance with near the same equipment for a lot less money. Heck, even the Mercedes CLA, there's some sort of value play there potentially, although you're probably not getting the manual. But if you wanted a CLA with a manual, you can't get one. So again, this comes into play? Maybe. So what are my final thoughts on the manual Mazda 3? Well, it's a well put together car and I quite like it. I'm just not certain Mazda's gonna find enough customers for it, but I hope they do.